So if I can talk a little bit about sort of the historical context, what was going on in Britain at the time, because that does play into it's difficult or impossible to say that doesn't all play into trying to form a picture of what it is and why it is. Because it used to be the case, as I've just said, it used to be the case that we just thought we knew exactly. It's not really, there's nothing to really argue about.
That
but there
sort
is.
of Victorian notion of it, it's a tax record, is the one that I was actually taught in school. So it's interesting to me to know that that's not the whole picture.
Yeah. So the reason why we don't think that now is because people, again, in the 20th century, second half of the 20th century, went back and studied the original document heavily. And they realised, well, that just can't be the case, because the way it's laid out would mean that it would be... It's just not for that. If you wanted to work out an individual person or an individual landholders or tenant-in-chief, as they were called, if you wanted to work out their individual sort of tax liability, it would take you hours and hours and hours to do that. It's not really for that. Just to cut to the chase, they think that it's actually now really it was to sort of legally in print who owned what, because they didn't have that. They'd stolen nearly all the land illegally off of Anglo-Saxon people, and they wanted something written down, something that, like a legal document, basically, that says we own everything now. So it's more that than it is about taxes and gelds.
Because, of course, William the Conqueror is a foreign invader, right?
Yeah, usurper.
So it's giving him legitimacy by having it all written down and documented. I mean, it gives it a certain authority, I suppose.
Mark Morris said this, quote, it's fantastically difficult to calculate geld payments to work out the liability of individual landowners. So yeah, but however, saying that, we're pretty sure that also it would have been used as a foundational document or as an aid in working out taxes as well. So it's not straightforward, it's more than one thing at once.
Well, I imagine if you've created this book that's so extensive, you're not just going to use it for one thing. You're not going to put in all that effort to achieve one aim. You want to do multiple things with it.
Of course, it's kind of obvious if you think about it for a minute, but it would have been out of date almost straight away. So this manor on this estate has got this many pigs. Well, within days or weeks, or certainly within months, that number will have changed, won't it? So within 1 year, it would be largely out of date, a lot of it anyway, all the minutiae of the detail of it anyway. So yeah.
Do you think it might in part be a means of William understanding the country in which he's conquered, where the wealth is centred, that sort of thing? You can get a measure of which areas are worth protecting, say, because of how many pigs they have. That's a measure of how wealthy they are.
Yeah, he didn't really know what he had. And he wanted to know what he had, what he did or didn't have.
It makes perfect sense, really. If you invade a country and take it over, well, you don't know the country, so you need some means of understanding it, and sending people out to get a measure of it makes sense.
I suppose it's like stealing a van full of cash or bullion. You're going to count it. I mean, just obviously, something like that. That's maybe not entirely fair, but... okay, so the historical context for what's going on. William spent his Christmas at Gloucester in 1085, and it was at that court that he sort of decided to do this Domesday survey, not the book, Domesday survey. Or was it Christmas 1086? Sorry, 1086. He first came up with the idea, really, to do this. And Britain at that moment, England at that moment, was in a really, really high state of tension. We thought, well, they really did think there would be a Viking invasion, some sort of alliance between Canute IV of Denmark and the Count of Flanders. They were getting together something in the order of 1,000 ships, maybe, or more, to invade Britain. So And all the intelligence seems that was definitely going to happen earlier in that year, 1086. But it didn't happen. By Christmas, they realised that it had either been postponed until the following year, or perhaps even postponed longer. And so it's interesting. Historians have noted that William the Conqueror pulled the trigger, so to speak, on the Domesday survey at that moment, because important as it is to find out what you own and who owns what and how much money there is in the land and what revenues can be generated, etc., 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 it's not of sort of vital importance that the state, so to speak, is not going to fall apart if you leave that another year or two or something, right? So why did William feel the need to do it right then in that moment? He's got bigger things on his plate,
It seems to me that he guessed, perhaps correctly, that they weren't going to invade, and he prioritised more at home domestic logistical things rather than militarising, which of course he would need that sort of manpower to do, wouldn't he? I imagine that there would be separate pools of men to do these things, either to mobilise the military and levy some men, or to go around, because of course you'd have to be literate, wouldn't you, if you're recording all these records. And I imagine that there's some overlap, but it's not to a great degree. But even so, you would want all of your focus to be on military, particularly if it's a massive invasion, as you're saying here.
Yeah. So what had happened is, mentioned in the last one, William had got together a giant army. They say it's much, much bigger than the army he came over in 1066 with. A massive army. They said something, one of the lines was that he'd got contingents of men from every region this side of the Alps. And he'd brought this massive army over to England and billeted them all over the country, everywhere, in all the big towns and villages and in all the manor houses. He was keeping these foreign knights ready for this potential invasion. We now know it never happened, of course. Canute IV gets himself murdered in a church not very long later. Anyway, but historians have sort of wondered what was the exact route, because we don't know, wondered about the exact relationship between this invasion threat and the Domesday Survey. Did William know? Well, he couldn't have known for sure that they wouldn't come the next year. It looked like they probably wouldn't. Don't know for sure. Something you hit on there, which I think is really interesting, is just the number of men it would have taken, the logistics. So if I say a word or two on that, remarkably few. So they cut the country up, and it is mainly England. Well, it's entirely England, really. Into 7 circuits. They called them circuits for some reason. Split them up into 7, and each one of those had someone really quite important in charge of it, like a bishop sort of level. And under him, just a handful of men, 4, 5, 6 guys each. So we think, like, going around the country and physically going into homesteads and manor houses and things and finding out, quizzing people exactly what they have or haven't got. I think maybe it's as much as 30 guys doing it.
What, per...
total.
Total?
Yeah.
And they did the entirety of England in 6 months?
Yeah.
Did they sleep?
And they did it twice. They checked. William sent another set of guys around to make sure the first ones weren't trying to defraud him out of things. Yeah.
I suppose that makes sense, yeah.
Yes, prudent.
That's very impressive, though.
Yeah.
Even more so.
Well, it's one of the things it does point to, you can't help but come to the conclusion that it was quite a well-oiled bureaucracy on some level. So one of the things, I'm just changing the point slightly, and it doesn't necessarily completely relate, but still it's something to note, is that when the Normans threw up their cathedrals in stone, a lot of the chronicles and various other people that lived at the time said they're unbelievably impressive for 2 reasons. One, just the thing itself, the final object of the cathedral is awe-inspiring. But what's almost as incredible is how quickly it was done. Because cathedrals in later centuries took a long, long time. Like Lincoln Cathedral, for example, the rebuilding of Lincoln Cathedral took, what was it, over 100 years, way more than 100 years, close to 200 years or something.
It is quite impressive, though. I've been there before. It's quite intimidating, its size.
Whereas Winchester Cathedral, the original Norman one, they threw it up in a handful of years, somehow. So it seems that when William the Conqueror lit a fire under a project, it got done, you know?
So do you think that that's William's sort of personality? Do you think that that's the reason for this seemingly good logistics? Is that the main factor?
I think it's part of it. It's certainly part of it. But it's not the full story. In fact, that is one of the things historians like to talk about a bit, is that how much was this purely a Norman project, and how much were they actually drawing upon previous Anglo-Saxon versions of this? Because none of them survive, and certainly would never have been in as much detail, we think. But they did still, the Anglo-Saxon monarchs did do, I hesitate to call them censuses, because again, they're nothing like a modern census whatsoever. However, they did do things a bit like this, send out men to find out exactly, or roughly rather, how much land certain earls had. Like the crown, the central monarchy would do that. And so we know that they had things like that. And it seems that William, built upon that, maybe streamlined it, certainly poured more money into the project.
That seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Yeah. Right. So it seems like it's a number of things. It wasn't just that William stamped his foot and shouted at enough people and it got done. There's more to it than that. Although you can't deny that it came from him. The order came from the very, very top. I've got a line here, or just to mention that the name Domesday Book is a nickname, essentially, given to it later, a generation or more later.
So it does seem an unusual name, doesn't it? If they were to come up with it at the time, it sounds a bit ominous.
Yeah, well, it's disparaging, really, isn't it? I mean, Doomsday, literally the Judgment Day, the end of days, an ultimate reckoning of which there's no appeal. That's how normal people seem to have felt about it. Can't really blame them, really. But originally, or at the time, people just called it the King's Book, or the Book of Winchester, or the Book of the Exchequer. Couple of different things. So Doomsday comes a bit later, although it seems that people colloquially called it that at the time. Anyway.
Why was it just because of the totalising control of William, and he was a foreign invader, and therefore, the fact he had such a vast understanding of the country is kind of spelling their doom for independence?
Yeah, well, as I say, like Doomsday is another word for rapture, the day of judgment, when you will be, everything will be reckoned up, quite literally, like your soul and things. So it's obviously not that, but it's like a doomsday where everything is reckoned up, and as I say, there's no appeal against it. There will be a final judgment on you, like your geld, your tax liability. So yeah, obviously it's tongue in cheek, but it is, it comes exactly from that.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.